I've got my coffee and I'm ready to go. And yet, this little brown sip of heaven once tried to seduce me into collaborating with the world.
Attention, attention. Stay tuned for an incoming transmission.
This is Radio Free Ecclesia, the pirate radio broadcast to the citizens of God's kingdom living in enemy-occupied territory. In the last episode, we talked about the Sadducees and their strategy of collaboration as a way of trying to exist during the Roman occupation. We looked at it and tried to see if we could learn anything from their example about our time of living under the occupation of this world as we try to live out our citizenship while the world is currently under a rogue occupation. We saw that the strategy of the Sadducees ultimately led them to miss out on the very thing that God was doing in their midst. That from a kingdom point of view, it was a failed strategy. They were unfaithful to their role as priests in God's kingdom and missed out on the thing God was doing among them in the form of Jesus. In fact, in the very end, they ended up resisting the very work that God was doing by handing Jesus over to be crucified. Now, that may raise another question. What does collaboration look like in our day and age? As Christians, what should we be on the lookout for? Well, collaboration can take on many forms and can engage in many different institutions. We could collaborate with politics and politicians and political parties and politicians who are not aligned with God's kingdom. We could collaborate in the economic realm, in business and in trade. Again, collaborating with institutions that are not aligned with God's kingdom. We could collaborate with broad cultural forces that are seeking to bring about change or other goals or aspirations that don't align with God's kingdom. It can happen in a lot of different ways. But for me and my wife, it once took the form of us potentially collaborating in the form of coffee. I'll tell you the story. My wife and I are coffee people. That's how we met, really, was over coffee. On our earliest dates, we went out to coffee shops and hung out together and got to know each other. We love coffee. Our friends love coffee. When we travel, one of the things we like to do is find coffee shops in the new towns that we visit. We just love coffee and we love cafe culture. And years ago, we had the opportunity to open up our own coffee shop. And we were really excited about it. And we really, really enjoyed it. We did that for about 7 years. And right out of the gate, our coffee shop did very, very well. And we thanked God for that. We were immensely grateful for the success we were having. And we were working in conjunction with a company that was a coffee roaster. We had a partnership with them. We were an independent shop, but we're working with this coffee roaster, selling and using their products and licensing their name. Well, this roaster was also working on a project where they were going to create a line of coffee for a very big celebrity at the time, a well-known musician. And they were already producing coffee, and they wanted to open up a chain of cafes that would be branded with this celebrity's name. And so, because our shop was doing very well, they invited us on to be a part of the developmental process in this endeavor. And it had a tremendous amount of potential to make a lot of money. So needless to say, Suzanne and I were very intrigued by the prospect of being a part of this project. So Suzanne and I began to work closely with this company in the development of this project. We began to do research and began the development phase of opening up these cafes. But one of the things we realized very quickly is that the branding of this company was going to incorporate a lot of things that we weren't really comfortable with as Christians. This musician, to the best of my knowledge, is not a Christian, and certainly his music did not reflect the values of God's kingdom. And so very soon we began to realize that this was probably a project we were not going to be able to really get on board with and participate in. It was tough because, again, there was a lot of potential there. This was something that was going to be a nationwide chain, and we had the opportunity to get in on the ground floor. There would have been a lot of money to be made, but we realized that we had to make a decision. That collaboration, sooner or later, and in our estimation sooner, was going to require us to begin to compromise our kingdom values, our kingdom commitments. It would compromise our witness as believers. We were going to have to begin to endorse and to celebrate things that we knew that we couldn't do. And so we decided that this was a collaboration that we could not pursue. And so we thanked the people we were working with for their invitation, but we withdrew. And to this day, we have no regrets. Looking back, we know that we did the right thing. Now, I'm sure some people would come up with a variety of arguments as to why, even as Christians, we should have pursued that. I think some people would have said, well, guys, think of what you could have done with that money. You guys are believers. You would practice generosity and you would funnel that money into things that would build God's kingdom or be a benefit to people. And sure, I think we probably would have done something like that. And other people would have said, think of the people you could have influenced, all the contacts you would have made. You could have been Christians in this kind of environment, being a light to the people in the world as you were engaging in this. And I'm sure that, yes, we would have tried to have been a light in that situation. But I think the lesson of the Sadducees tells us that those ideals do not actually come to pass. Because at some point, you are going to come into conflict with those people. Your ideals, your values and virtues from a kingdom point of view are not going to align with theirs. And they're going to feel no motivation whatsoever to come to your side. That's just not their system. So in order to work together, something's going to have to give. And usually what happens is it's the kingdom that gives way to the world. Anytime we collaborate with the world doesn't become more like us. We become more like the world. That's what happened to the Sadducees. They stopped looking like the people that God wanted them to be. And Suzanne and I were concerned that if we went down this path, we were going to stop looking like the people God wanted us to be. The seduction, the temptation, the logical arguments simply are not strong enough. Those arguments do not stand up to the reality that when we collaborate with the world, we end up looking like the world. This makes me think of what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, beginning in verse 14. Paul says, "Do not be mismatched with unbelievers." Older translations say, "Don't be unequally yoked." And if you've been a Christian for a long time, maybe that's the way you heard it expressed. And a lot of times I've heard people use that in the context of marriage, that Christians should not marry non-believers. And Paul does say that in places like 1 Corinthians 7. But nothing in this passage suggests that he's thinking about marriage specifically. I think Paul recognizes the very point that I've been trying to make here, that anytime we form an allegiance, anytime we try to collaborate with non-believers, at some point that is going to come into conflict. And one side is going to have to give. And the non-believers aren't going to give in. It's a mismatched relationship. It's two conflicting value systems, priority systems. And anytime we enter into that, those things are going to come into conflict. And so this is why our resistance has to be strong, why we have to resist the very temptation of collaboration. There will be logical arguments. I said in the previous video, I think the Sadducees really believed they were doing the right thing. They probably had so many logical arguments they marshaled in favor of that particular strategy. And to this day, I know Christians do that as well. But I know, watching with my own eyes, far too often, those strategies end up failing. We end up not reflecting God's kingdom and not the glory of his kingdom. We end up compromising. Collaboration is not a strategy for living under the occupation of the rogue regime. The only strategy that we can embrace is one that places God's kingdom first. God's kingdom alone getting our sole and complete allegiance. So how does the story end? Still love my coffee, so does Suzanne. We're still coffee people, we're still cafe people. We sold our cafe years ago. We had been in it long enough, and I knew that my career path was taking me into Bible teaching. That was going to be my ultimate vocation. And so the two of us decided eventually to sell the shop. But we have no regrets. We have never looked back. It was a great time. We enjoyed it. We made lots of good friends, and it was a great experience. But at the end of the day, the most important thing to us was seeking first God's kingdom and his righteousness. We know we made the right decision. And we know that in this lifetime, even if we had to make a sacrifice, even if we didn't get to enjoy the material rewards that might have gone with collaboration, we know that God is the one who provides for us. God is the one who vindicates us. And someday, when Jesus returns in his glory, we will be able to share in that glory. And it will be a glory that will far exceed anything we might have experienced in this world. Whatever sacrifices we make in this world will be absolutely worth it when Jesus returns and we all experience his glory.